Milton Lewis, cane farmer of Warrigar Island. Well, I grew up on a small farm down the road from where I live today. As a child, I guess, as so many others within our industry did, we helped on the farm from a very early age. So having done that and being very keen to help, whether it be driving tractors or even chipping cane, because we used to chip our cane in those days, I quite enjoyed it. But upon leaving school, my parents wouldn't allow me to come home, so I went and worked in a bank for nearly 2.5 years. All my mates were starting to drive around in new cars, and I decided that I was going to do as they had and go and cut cane. So I cut cane for 3 seasons until the passing of my father, and then I started share farming for my mother and leasing. So after the share farming and leasing for a few years, I was able to buy my first farm, and from there I've farmed for myself ever since 1969. Yeah. I think the challenges, I always love challenges, and there are lots of challenges in farming. And the thing is that there's also a need to try and produce more crop from one year to the next. It's not always possible because of various things such as weather mainly. But no, and I do like the fact that you're independent. There's a lot of flexibility. You're not actually tied down 7 days a week, but whilst there's flexibility there and independence, you still have to work in with your neighbours, and particularly when it comes in to harvesting, we have very orderly harvesting. So overall though, I really enjoy cane farming. It's all I ever want to do. To me, it's an opportunity for us to acknowledge the pioneering work of not just the millers, but also the growers, their families and their workforces in developing our industry to the level that it's at today. We have a very proud and long history going back to the 1860s, and in New South Wales in 1870 there were 27 grower-owned sugar mills. So we go back a long way. We're the oldest major cropping industry on the New South Wales coast that is still around. There have been some other industries such as maize and corn growing, but we're the only one that is still a major industry. Yes, well there have been some massive changes. I grew up on a farm where well, my dad had one of the very early grey Fergusons, but he still continued to use horses up until the early 50s. And so everything back in those days was pretty damn manual. It didn't I mean, obviously the cane was cut manually, the cane was loaded manually, and it was derricked onto the barges, all manually. With the advent of mechanical loading, originally with front-end loaders and back-end loaders, and then we progressed to what we call Toft loaders, we were able to reduce a lot of that manual labour. At the same time, with those loaders, we were carting more tonnes of cane, or more cane on the carts. Originally, the horse and cart used to only cart about half a tonne of cane, but we started to
cart 2.5 tonnes and even up to 6 tonnes at the end of manual cutting. With the progression to those bigger loads, there was a need to actually lift the loads off the carts by either by originally sometimes just pulling them up with a tractor with blocks and pulleys, but then we had powered winches. We used to power our winches with small motors or even car engines on the winches. But going back to the heavier loads, at the end, there was cane brought in from out at Mororo, our northernmost cane growing area, and they used to bring 6-tonne loads in there, and they actually travelled along the highway in those days with 6-tonne loads, no brakes, but these 6-tonne loads used to load a barge with about 7 loads. Which was quite remarkable. I mean, OH&S would have had a field day, and Transport New South Wales would have too, with these unbraked. And these loads were hauled by 35 horsepower tractors. So, you know, that was the last, of course, of our manual harvesting. From there we progressed to mechanical harvesting, and that just changed the ball game completely. It made a big difference to the farmer in that he wasn't hauling cane to the derrick, because we used to tie our tractors up hauling the cane from the paddock into the derrick, and you know, for some people that was quite a few weeks each year that they couldn't carry out their normal farming practices. So yeah, but with that heavy machinery, of course, travelling on our paddocks under at times quite wet conditions, it meant that we had to have bigger tractors, and we had to put a lot of effort into the preparation of our paddocks, because in those days we did a lot of what we call replanting. We'd take one paddock out and replant it with another crop. Today we don't do a lot of that. In fact, not a lot. We do fallow our paddocks. But talking of fallowing, back in those days we used to grow cowpeas and other legume crops as a fallow crop, which conditioned our soil and put nitrogen in the soil. Today we grow soybeans, and that has become a major part of our cropping. But from the mechanical harvesting, we haven't. Well, we've got machines now that are guided by GPS, but really there has been progress, no doubt about that, but not a lot of progress since the mid-70s when mechanical harvesting was introduced. There are other issues, though, that have made a big difference to us. For instance, back when I was going to school, most of the cane farms on the lower river had a small dairy. They might have only milked 20, 30 cows. But with the floods of the 50s, 54, people went out of dairying, and so there was a lot of grass paddock ploughed up, and whether people grew corn or green peas or something like that, or whether they planted cane, to a large extent, of course, in those early days, depended on the distance to the riverbank where the cane derricks were. So a lot of people actually raised beef cattle during that period between dairying going out and mechanical harvesting coming in, because with mechanical harvesting, of course, we could travel kilometres if need be to cart the cane to the cane loading pads. In the mid-60s, there was a lot of flood mitigation work done, and that opened up a lot of country for us. In this lower river area here in particular, with the delta, we had a lot of low swampy country, which when drained became very productive land. So flood mitigation certainly made a massive difference. Going on from there, laser grading started to occur from the early 90s right through until recent times, although most of the country's been lasered going back a few years now. But laser grading improved our drainage quite a bit. When you added that to the flood mitigation work, it made a massive difference to the productivity of a lot of this farmland on the lower river. From there, let me see. One thing that I omitted to mention earlier on too, and I realise you can cut this. After the war, there was a big shortage of manpower, and so there were a lot of displaced people came out of Europe. We had Italians, we had Germans, Austrians, Lithuanians, Estonians, people out of the Baltic states. They came here and they were forced to work for 2 years wherever they were sent. And so these people made a massive contribution. Without them, the crops would have been, left in the paddock. A lot of crops, not all, but there would have been a lot of crops left behind. So I think they need to be acknowledged too for the contribution they made. Some of them stayed on and ended up being cane farmers here. In Queensland, of course, there were a lot more up there. But no, over the years we have had labour shortages. Back before mechanical harvesting came in, farmers' sons, and I was on my working for myself at the time, but we had to cut a lot of our own cane because we just could not get people to cut the cane. The cane cutting was quite a laborious job. We cut cane in the rain, we cut cane in 100-degree Fahrenheit temperatures, so that didn't suit a lot of people, and so we were often very short only in the last few years, but in those early 70s there was a major problem there with labour. Going back again, I remember quite well the gangs before the barracks were built. The cane barracks were built around about 54 from memory, 55 thereabouts. The cutters used to live in tents. And on Warragor Island, where I am, an island of about 750 acres, we had 4 galleys where they used to do the cooking, and they used to move the tents along to the next farm. As they progressed from, say, the bottom to the top of the island, they would move the tents, and they employed a cook, and that cook would prepare the meals, the smokos and the lunch in the middle of the day, and they would walk to wherever the gang were cutting. So sometimes they were walking through long grass. I'd never ever heard of anyone being bitten with a snake, but it's a wonder because in those days, black snakes were prolific, and so they were obviously very careful. But no, the galleys were made of corrugated iron. They had a concrete floor and a big fireplace at the back, and they used to cook the meals over that open fire. Yeah. I would control the weather. The weather determines our productivity. For instance, last year I harvested one of the very worst crops I've ever harvested because we had a very, very wet establishment period and then it turned into a drought. However, this year I have the very best year-old cane I have ever seen in all my life. We had a perfect growing season from the end of October last year up until now, and so if I could control the weather, I reckon I could make a massive difference to the productivity of our industry. Yeah. Just as a matter of interest, I've been very fortunate that I was able to do what I wanted to do from the time I was a little fella. I've been fortunate in that I spent 30 odd years on the board of the milling cooperative, and I'm still active after 45 years with our productivity committee. So I've met a lot of very interesting people across the 3 mill areas, and I've made some really good friends and learnt a lot from talking to these people. So yeah, all I can say is I've been very, very fortunate to be part of this industry. Yeah.